every other level, he's unable as an individual to do what it takes to complete the task at hand, which is to renew the Islamic tradition. The same is true in Morocco with Mulli Abd Hafid, who was a great Islamic ruler at the turn of this century. He's deposed by the French. He was a scholar, he was a lover of knowledge, and he was attempting to revivify the Islamic tradition within Morocco and to protect Morocco from the incursions of the Europeans, but he also failed. Now, what the Europeans call this is the Great Game. This is what they called it. They called it the Great Game, playing with the Muslims. And it's still going on. The game is still going on. And it's actually quite frightening, because what happens is what I'm becoming to realize now, is that all of the so-called liberation movements of the 1950s that were centered out of Egypt were in fact nothing other than the power plays of the Americans at removing the Europeans from their colonial influence in those lands. The Americans were directing those movements, and this evidence, I'm telling you, it's there. You can find it if you do the research. They were directing these movements, they were undermining the European power, and they were moving in for this Pax Americana, the American century, right, post-World War II. So many noble people fought from the Muslims with the best of intentions. Many of them died, and inshallah Allah give them Jannah. But the truth of the matter is, our countries, after all of that bloodshed and all of that suffering of the Algerian people, the land of 1 million martyrs, look at the state of Algeria now. Really, look at the state of Algeria now. 1 million martyrs fought. In the late 50s into 1962 were killed at freeing the French. And for what? For Ben Bella and Boumediene, people that betrayed the people that shed their blood for that land. And Ben Bella then becomes he's like he's saying now Islam is the only solution. It's what Sheikh Hisham al-Burhani, I was once in a gathering in the Emirates, and there was an ex-Syrian president there from the early 60s, can't remember his name, and he was saying how Islam is the only answer. And Sheikh Hisham al-Burhani said to him, why is it that you people never realize that when you're in power? And then when you lose your power, suddenly it becomes obvious. It's a very good question. Now, if you look at this book, it's very amazing. It really is extraordinary what that they were doing here. Right? Lord Kitchener. Kitchener sets out to capture Islam. Kitchener and his colleagues believed that Islam could be bought, manipulated, or captured by buying, manipulating, or capturing its religious leadership. And they did it. Seriously. They did it. There's Azhari Shuyukh that were in the same Freemasonic lodge as Lord Cromer in Egypt. It's historical fact. They're all declassified documentation. You can see their own handwritings, their own signatures. In fact, you get this blue, the Freemasonic, in the French Revolution, the Freemasonic colors were red, blue, and white. Equality, liberty, equality, and brotherhood, right? Load of nonsense. Freemasonic rubbish, right? And so you get the Azharis suddenly showing up with red and blue instead of black tassels. I'm not making this up. Blue instead of black tassels on their turbans. Where'd that come from? Red, blue, and white. Right there, the French flag up on his head. Now it's the American flag. He just needs some stars up there, right? Subhanallah. It's very sad. They were intrigued by the notion that whoever controlled the Khalif controlled Islam. And it was Kitchener actually did not want to split Islam up into several different countries. He wanted to control the Khalifa. And he said, it's better if we got the leadership, we can control the whole thing at one time. The other British divide and conquer. It's a better policy. We can make a lot of money selling them weapons while they kill each other. Right? So, for Kitchener and his entourage, the possibilities of a Muslim jihad against Britain was a recurring nightmare. Right? So they set out to undermine it. Now, what they did is they created nationalism. Right? Now, I just want to read Fromkin here very briefly, but it's very interesting what he says. Often referred to as nationalists, these men are more accurately described as separatists. They did not ask for independence. They asked for a greater measure of participation and local rule. They were willing to be ruled largely by Turks because the Turks were fellow Muslims. He's talking about Egyptian and Syrian and Lebanese people at that time. They were not nationalists. Unlike European nationalists, they were people whose beliefs existed in a religious rather than a secular framework. They lived within the walls of the city of Islam in a sense in which Europe had not lived within Christendom since the early Middle Ages. For like the cities built in the Arab world in medieval times, the lives of the Muslim circles centered around a central mosque. They did not represent an ethnic group, for historically the only ethnic or true Arabs, in quotation, were the inhabitants of Arabia, while the Arabic-speaking populations of such provinces as Baghdad and Damascus and other places were mixed ethnic stock. Right? Anyway, the book goes on, right? Now just look what Weizmann, founder of Zionism, right? One of the founders of Zionism, says was introduced to Prince Faisal, not the one that was killed, but the one that was working with Lawrence and these people, and was enthusiastic about him, a Zionist, enthusiastic about a Muslim. That's a bad sign. Right? Weizmann wrote to his wife that, quote, "He is the first real Arab nationalist I have met." So this is an indication that it did not exist in the Muslim framework only less than 100 years ago. It didn't exist. Because he's saying he's the first real Arab nationalist that I met. He is a leader, exclamation mark. He's quite intelligent. Quite. Can't be very intelligent, right? If he's an Arab and a nationalist, right? Right? And a very honest man. Handsome as a picture. He is not interested in Palestine like Sultan Abdul Hamid. But on the other hand, he wants Damascus and the whole northern Syria. He is contemptuous of the Palestinian Arabs, who he doesn't even regard as Arabs. The Prophet ﷺ said, "My ummah would be destroyed by little children from the tribe of Quraysh." That the ummah would be destroyed by little children, ghulaymiya, like little children, little boys from the tribe of Quraysh. So it goes on, the big game, right? They dismantle, coup d'etat, Sultan Abdul Hamid, dismantle the thing, and then Islam is redacted, and people don't realize this. A whole new version of Islam is written, and it begins emphasizing things like hubb al-watan min al-iman, love of nation is from iman, which is a saying that refers to akhirah primarily, right? Because the famous poetry that Imam Nawawi has in the introduction to his introduction to the Riyadh al-Salihin is that the people who realized the dunya was not their watan, right? They realized that the dunya was not their watan, so they divorced the dunya. Right? So nationalism becomes, I'm an Egyptian, you're a Syrian, he's a Lebanese, you're a Pakistani, he's a Turk, and this is the separation, divide and conquer. We no longer see ourselves within the fold of Islam, the brotherhood that Allah has given us. إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ. The believers are brothers. We now see ourselves, I'm an American Muslim, he's a Pakistani Muslim, he's a Indian Muslim, he's a Bengali Muslim, and on and on and on. False designations that Islam rejects completely. And you can go on and on. I mean, the story goes on. It just gets worse. So what I'd rather do is look quickly at our present, and then when I mention about envy, the disease of envy is a very important disease to understand. Because the Muslims have become deeply envious of the West. And you can see it in that original quote that I used about envy, that it's a secret admiration.